My guests today are Syreeta Farria and Victoria Washington, two Detroit homeschooling moms who each run separate but complementary homeschooling programs for local families. Syreeta leads Detroit Discoverers, a weekly homeschool program focused around a particular theme that includes field trips across the city. Victoria runs Young Scientists in Action that weaves STEM subjects and science experiments into Detroit Discoverers, providing a balanced set of educational experiences for local homeschoolers. Syreeta and Victoria, welcome to the Liberated podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Nice to be here.
It's so great to have you here. I was so delighted to meet you both in person when I visited Detroit recently to see this hub of education, entrepreneurship, and innovation that's emerging in that area, and especially growth in the homeschooling population in kind of the greater Detroit area, which was exciting to see. And you're very much a part of that in the programs that you've created that help to support homeschooling families and provide community and connection and sort of academic support. So it's great to have you here to talk more about that. I want to talk about your programs in a little bit, but I'd love to start with your decisions, each of you, why you decided to come to homeschooling for your own children. You each have sort of varied professional backgrounds. Syreeta, your background, I believe, is in social services.
Mhm.
And Victoria, your background, you have a degree in chemistry. So your background is more in the sciences. How did you go from sort of your professional backgrounds and academic backgrounds into then deciding to become homeschooling parents?
Sure. I can start. So you're right. My background is in social work. And before becoming a mom, I worked as an infant mental health therapist. So, doing a lot of home based work for moms who were either pregnant or had little ones ages 0 to 6. And when I became pregnant, I think one of the things I realized is that I spent so much time focusing on the relationship with other moms and their little ones that I knew I could not do that work and give it good justice while I'm also focused on creating and establishing the relationship with myself and my own children. And so it really was a time to kind of pivot and rethink life choices and professional choices. And so, how I initially started, I was working with Brilliant Detroit, facilitating play and learn series. And so, these are really play based, fun, hands on learning series for little ones getting ready to go into kindergarten. And in doing that work, I realized how much I enjoyed having my little ones with me. I actually tried the traditional route with my daughter. And so she went to preschool maybe for about 7 months. And I
Mm.
think I mentioned this to you, Carrie, when you came out to visit in Detroit. Even though she was going consistently every day, it was, Mom, I don't want to go to school. Mom, I'd rather stay home with you. Mom, I don't want to go today. And this was a quality preschool. It was a very hands on curriculum. It was very play based. And I felt good about the school, but I definitely did not feel good about my child saying every day, I really would rather be with you as opposed to going to school. And so one of the things that really helped me to pivot was when we did our first parent teacher conference. And so many of the things that they tested on or reported on with my child were not accurate indicators of where she was academically. And I really felt like, how can you teach my child if you don't know my child and you don't see her strengths and the things that she knows and is interested in? And just thinking long term and looking at the state of education, not just in Detroit, but across the country, I realize so many school systems, when you think about traditional classrooms, it's this kind of one size fits all approach, right? But we know not all learners fit into this one size fits model. And I just look at the way that my children learn and explore and know that if they were in a traditional setting, they would not grow and thrive in the way that they've been able to at home. So those were some of the things that kind of led me to this journey. I've really enjoyed kind of learning side by side with them and in the real world and the community and exploring the things that they're interested in. So that's just a
Really
bit
great.
about my journey.
Victoria, I want to get to you in one moment, but I just wanted to give a couple of, clarifying points here. Syreeta, you mentioned Brilliant Detroit, which is a community partnership where you host the Detroit Discovers homeschool program weekly at that location. Brilliant Detroit is a phenomenal nonprofit throughout the city. It's a community center focused on neighborhood empowerment and early literacy with 14 locations throughout Detroit. And so I just wanted to mention that too. I'd love to also, again, just for another minute, Syreeta, ask, why was your child saying that they wanted to be home with you? What was some of the reaction to what you said was a high quality preschool program? What was what was still lacking for her?
That's a great question. I think one thing that happened a lot was a lot of the things that they did at school were things that we were doing at home. And I don't think she understood, why do I need to go home and go to school and paint or play with this puzzle or with this set of dolls when we already have a lot of those same things at home. And she would point out certain things that were on their shelves at school, like, Mommy, we have that puzzle at home. And that was true. We had a lot of similar things at home that they did at school. But I think a big piece was with my children, two things. One is that we do a lot of what I consider community-based learning. And so we spend time at home talking about animals or talking about math or talking about a variety of topics, but I love to pack them up and say, let's go in the real world and see how these things work. So if at home we talk about giraffes or elephants and lions and animals in Africa, then we pack up and we go to the zoo and we look at all of the animals that are there that are natively from the continent of Africa. They're not doing that in traditional preschools. And honestly, as children get older, the amount of real world application and field trips get smaller and smaller and smaller. So I think she missed those sort of things, but she also just missed some of the freedom that we're able to have at home. She is a kinetic learner and she loves to move and explore in that way. And so we might say, okay, we've done our learning time at home and spend 2 or 3 hours at a playground. She's not going to get that every day at school, not in preschool, and certainly not as she gets older. And so I think just being able to be authentically herself and learn in the way that feels comfortable for her is something that she was not getting at preschool and was not going to get at preschool. And I think in her own young way, she knew that.
I love that she sort of saw the benefit of homeschooling, perhaps a few months before you did too, in sort of seeing that, hey, Mom, you can do this.
Yeah.
We have all of these same resources at home and much more freedom and flexibility. And like you said, a much more authentic learning experience that's very community based and outside of the home. So great. I'm glad you added additional context there. So Victoria, I'd love to hear your story too, of going from kind of a science background and experience there to then deciding to homeschool your child.
Absolutely. I just want to throw out there, I'm very encouraged by Syreeta's testimony because I actually haven't heard it in the full way like that. Like, that's incredible. So yes, Syreeta, go, go, go. So, as I reflect on my journey into homeschooling, I would have to start at when my baby was about 8 months old. I had worked for her the first 8 months of her life, and I exclusively breastfed actually nearly 4.5 years of her life. But I would say that I was working in corporate, I was working in my field of expertise, and it was just challenging, the idea of, getting back in that workforce after 6 months of leave. That was just horrendous for me. And so I realized that I had to make a very, very clear and committed decision to come home and be just figure it out, had to figure it out. But I wasn't able to be gainfully unemployed for very long. It was a couple months later that my brothers and I and another business partner decided to launch and start an edible cookie dough business. And so here I am with this young child and becoming the chief operations officer of of a small business. And what I just learned in that season is that I can bring her with me. Wait a minute, this is opening up an entire world for her to be in funder meetings, with big names and be at pitch competitions and be a part of that scene, running the store with me as she got older at, 18 months, old, coming to class with me while I become a community-based doula and trained in that. It was just like, it made sense to keep her close, not to what I didn't see it as keeping her from anything, but it really just opened up this world that she can be exposed to everything that I am experiencing in my daily life. And not to mention with running the business, but my brother, younger brother at launched a nonprofit organization himself, where he actually converts blighted properties to pocket parks in the neighborhood. And so that was a part of my daughter's volunteer work. I mean, they made space for her when she's toddling at 2 years old to dig up the ground and garden, not just at our home garden, because I didn't have one, but here we are building up this very neighborhood that we've been living in for generations and generations. And so that was very eye-opening to me. And from just being a business owner, working in the nonprofit with my brother's nonprofit, I just felt very confident that I can do this. I felt like not only can I expose her to ways of living that I would be enjoying and she may be at a traditional school, but furthermore, I began to go on a clear, very pointed search for programs that would be targeted for her. So that did include home visiting services, that did include play groups, going to the library story time, and just having the freedom to do that, not watching the clock, not wondering if we are taking, dawdling too long afterwards and lingering too long. But as Syreeta mentioned, building community and being a part and fabric of the community and having the freedom to do that was very, very exciting. The pandemic was pivotal for me. That was not when I made the decision to homeschool, but what I also realized then is that because of the pandemic, all of these high quality programs would have to pivot to virtual. And so that opened a door for me to gain access and give my daughter greater access to now community with other peers, access to resources and materials, and enroll her in very high quality programs that would be meeting virtually so that I could still watch over her and be with her and walk out that journey of her education, but giving her access to some of the resources that typically are only available to those who are willing to enroll their children in traditional models. So it just continues to go from there. I would say for me, it was a thirst for partnering with my child on her educational journey, breaking down the barriers and limitations that she could even consider placing on herself. You want to sew, you want to ice skate, you want to, do field hockey, you want to spend all day with your uncle, taking a tour of the neighborhood while he entertained funders. Yes, you can at 4, 5, 6. That is your life, right? Taking funder meetings. And now she's booking meetings with her uncle because he's a branding ambassador. He's really good at branding and marketing. She's putting it on his calendar. Like, I have a business idea I need to run by you, and she's 6 and it's crazy. So it's just incredible. I just have to echo what Syreeta said. It's the freedom to be, the freedom to parent the way that you want to, the freedom to enjoy the field trips. We're not rushing through. We are lingering and sitting by the side of the road and taking deep breaths and absolutely, absolutely enjoying it.
I love that description because I think that it shows the way in which homeschooling is really a lifestyle decision, and that you can, if you choose, sort of weave professional, work and experiences and community and family all together. And that's certainly what you were able to see, and then expose your child to all that the world has to offer, both locally and then increasingly beyond through digital resources and curriculum and other tools that you, as you mentioned, I think has been even more unlocked since the pandemic. So, Victoria, I'd love to hear what prompted you to create Young Scientists in Action. What was sort of that pathway from, okay, I'm going to homeschool my child and we're going to continue to live this sort of immersive, authentic life within our community to then, I'd like to create a STEM focused homeschooling program.
Absolutely. So because my background is in science and I loved chemistry class. Like I loved it in high school. I loved it in college. Just the fundamental elementary concepts of chemistry and science. What I found is very early, I saw that my daughter had an interest in science, but I didn't think that I was actually giving her a lot of opportunities to engage in the scientific method. Now, exploration, free play, that is awesome. But in a structured, like just because I homeschool doesn't mean I buck the system on structure. I don't see value in structure or somewhat constraints and guidance, right? For learners, I think that there's a balance there. And so that's what to me science provides. We're going to take time to think about this, and then we're going to test it out and we're going to rewrite the script if we have to and come back to it. And so for me, creating a program, Young Scientists in Action, is really acknowledging that science is dynamic and it is all around us. And it's a beautiful thing to see children in their lens of how they see the world and the ways that they will explore, and meeting them at that level. Meeting them at the level that they can read and write and create and express, and just giving them the tools that they need to create something beautiful. And so that was truly the motivation, is to give my daughter and her friends, really, and her community more opportunities to engage in science in an open and unwielding way, with also an understanding and a respect for the scientific process.
Oh, I love it. So, Syreeta, sort of same question for you in creating Detroit Discoverers. Why did you decide to build that weekly homeschool program? How did it come to be? And then related to that, how did you and Victoria team up to provide these programs together?
Yes. So Detroit Discovers, I think a couple of things happened that led me down the path to creating that. I think one is that when we think about homeschoolers, there are a lot of stereotypes about what homeschoolers look like. And quite often, most people do not see moms like myself or Victoria. They do not see that there are Black and Brown families in urban areas that are moving away from traditional learning and deciding to do homeschooling or non traditional methods when it comes to educating their children. And a lot of homeschool families that I met felt like there were not resources in the city for them to homeschool their children. And they also didn't feel like there were other moms that looked like them or had similar values to them to homeschool with. And so I really felt like, how can we create a program for other families that look like us that really capitalize on the resources that are in the city? Detroit has so many beautiful parks, beautiful museums, nature centers, and I just really wanted to share my passion for that kind of community-based learning with other homeschoolers who were maybe newer to homeschooling and had younger learners and really felt unsure about, how do I go about homeschooling my children? I think in the beginning, families are like, I'm committed to this, but I don't know how to actually do this. And so I really wanted a program where, one, we could come together, create community, and learners and parents could explore different modalities for learning at home, but also to connect with other resources in the community so they didn't feel so isolated and alone in their homeschooling journey. And so that was really how Detroit Discoverers was born. I think in terms of thinking about the partnership with myself and Victoria, we have two different ways of approaching the world, right? Victoria is about science and about the scientific method and the facts and how do you test those things. And I come from this social science background that's all about, feelings and emotions. And I think we both had such beautiful ideas that it did not make sense to say, I'm going to run this one program over here. You're going to run this one program over there. We're kind of competing for the same families, when really, at the essence, we want kind of the same experience for our little people to be able to have quality, child led, hands on experiences. And so we were like, how can we do this in a way that's complementary to one another? And so we were able to say, these weeks are Detroit Discoverer weeks, where I'm taking the lead on facilitating activities and learning opportunities outside in the real world in terms of our field trips and activities there. And then on other weeks, Victoria is taking the lead on teaching us different things related to science and helping little ones actually test their hypotheses and get in their brains thinking in that way.
Just so exciting. So you launched Detroit Discoverers last fall, the fall of 2022, at the Brilliant Detroit location. And you mentioned that there are more and more, particularly Black and Brown families, who are interested in homeschooling and unconventional education, and are looking for that community, that connection, those resources and support. What do you think is drawing those families to out-of-system models? And I'll ask both of you, but we'll start, Syreeta, with you.
Sure. I can tell you this. In this last year, I've sat on two different panels around education. So one has been focused more on out of school time, and another one has been focused more on literacy. And in both of those, I've been like one of two homeschooling moms in that setting. But what I can say is the common denominator with all of those other moms is the high level of dissatisfaction those families feel with traditional learning. A lot of families do not feel heard when it comes to advocating for their children and their specific learning needs on multiple levels, right? They don't feel heard by the teachers. They don't feel heard by school boards and administration. They are unsure how to advocate in terms of policy on a state level. And they feel very frustrated knowing, as a mom, as a parent, I have ideas about what would be the best way to teach my children, but I'm constantly getting turned away from being able to have a voice in my child's education. And I can't imagine. I am a mother. I gave birth to this child. I've taught this child so many things along the way, and I'm going to continue to be a guide in their journey of life. But when it comes to school, I don't have an actual seat at the table. And I think that happens more and more with Black and Brown communities, that they feel disenfranchised and they don't feel like they have a voice in their school's education. I think we see a lot of inadequacies in terms of outcomes for children in Detroit than we do in some of the suburbs surrounding Detroit. And I think as more and more families see that, more and more families feel empowered to kind of take matters into their own hands and say, there is a different way. It doesn't have to be, I have to send them to this traditional school where I don't feel like this is working for them. I can pull back and think about, what can we do at home? What can we do in collaboration with other families or micro schools or co-ops to educate my child in a way that makes sense for them?
Amazing. Victoria, what do you think? What is drawing more families to these unconventional out-of-system models in Detroit and elsewhere?
Certainly, I think that especially what I'm hearing from Syreeta as well is that there's a disconnect, in my opinion, that in really a detachment, that somehow, somewhere along the way, we have, as a society, given such weight to this school system that it's almost like it's a passing of the baton. It's like I'm turning over my child to you. I'm giving you the reins. I'm giving you full authority. I'm giving you the power to dictate what my child's exposure will be, life experience will be, what their lens, and that ultimately will shape their lens. And I think for homeschool families, it is a statement and a stance to say, no, I was here from the beginning and I'm committed to be here for my child through the end. And not only am I not going to wait around for you to make room for me at the table, I'm simply going to step to the side and start crafting my own table. And I'm going to invite others who have like-mindedness to sit down here with me. And I really do think that there is not an existing real partnership. I think that the educational system is burdened and is crying out in desperation to say, how do we handle all these children from different backgrounds, different thought processes, different home environments, different needs? And somehow educators are supposed to be supreme in really dealing with the intimate needs of these children in masses. It's insane, right? So as a parent, I have an intimate relationship with my child, and then I also build community within an increased intimacy with others. And that is what I think allows our children to thrive, is creating a very clear environment, an inviting environment for them to feel safe, to grow. And that's not a word that comes to mind when safety, freedom, pleasure. Those are not words that come to mind when I think of a traditional school system. It's very oppressive and rigid and I would say not individualized, very grouped in one-stop shopping. It's just very cookie cutter, right? And so that's just not the experience. That does not give a parent who's now having to put their children in traditional model and go to work and be able to fully function as an adult, because you're constantly worried about your child, right? So I think that is what's driving folks to it, is also not settling for the 2 to 3 minute conversation at the end of an entire 8-hour school day of how was your day? No, I know how your day was because I was there with you. So instead of me asking, how was your day? I'm going to ask you, how did you feel when so-and-so pushed you on the playground? How did that make you feel when you read it out loud in front of everybody? Now I'm building community with my own child, right? I'm helping them to navigate life and really helping them to develop by leaps and bounds, not in a survival mode at school. I either have friends or I don't. I'm being bullied. I'm either listened to or I'm not. I'm constantly being told what to do, what I can't do. And it's just it's not an enticing environment for many families.
It's fascinating. Victoria, where do you think we are in terms of momentum with families considering schooling alternatives or unconventional models? Do you think, especially in the wake of the pandemic, do you think that interest continues to build? Is it plateauing? I guess what's sort of your future sense, particularly what you're seeing in Detroit, of where this is going?
I'll say that every day that passes, families are having real and raw experiences with the school system. And I think that there will always be people that says, oh, today is my last day. Baby, you're not going back there tomorrow. I'm not doing it. I can't do it. I got to figure it out, because every household does not have 2 traditional or working parents. I'm a single mother myself. I had to figure it out and say, over my dead body, will my kid be subjected to X, Y, and Z? I'll figure it out. And so I think that momentum is there, but this is not a popularity contest. This is not a club. This is not some like cute posh group. This is hard labor. This is intensive. Intentional parenting is exhausting. Homeschooling is exhausting. So I'm not here to be on the glamour train, but I will say that I do think that there will always be families, especially in our communities, who are faced with the same tired, unmet expectations, who will choose to homeschool. The question is, how can Syreeta and I, as just examples, continue to become even deeper pillars in the community to say, we're here. We're here for you because we've been doing it. We took a leap whatever amount of time ago. We're here. And so I think that if we continue to be, if others like us continue to be, there will always be that in some ways a mass exodus, or at least some type of exodus out of the system. And hopefully, I pray one day in time, there will be such a demand that it will force schools to actually change. And I think that that's kind of the place that we're in. If so many people are leaving, you have to change something if you want us to come back. So that's my thoughts on where we really are.
Yeah, it's such an important point that you make that, homeschooling is not easy. It takes a lot of commitment and intention, as you said. But that it's really, I think, education entrepreneurs like the two of you who are building these programs to help support homeschooling families that will encourage more parents who are dissatisfied with conventional schooling options to take the leap, because they will feel supported. They won't feel so alone. And it won't feel so overwhelming and so exhausting because they'll have that programmatic support. Syreeta, what do you think about the kind of future of homeschooling and out of system learning in Detroit over the next few years?
I agree with Victoria that I think we're going to see a lot more families moving towards that. I can say with our own programs, we had other moms who were like, we want to join. How can we get in? And we just didn't have capacity to get everyone in that wanted to. When I think about some of the other programs that are happening in Detroit, like Engage Detroit, the fantastic work that Bernita Bradley is doing, there are wait lists everywhere for this kind of programming, because more and more families are feeling empowered and feeling like I can teach my child and I can learn alongside with them. One of the things I think Victoria said earlier is that traditional learning can really be oppressive, and there's not a lot of space for children to discover what they're interested in and go along with those interests, right? I think about my son who is 4. He loves every animal under the sun, right? You could talk about giraffes, you could talk about ocean animals, you could talk about birds. It doesn't matter. If it's an animal, he loves it, right? In a traditional school, they might have one unit, 1 month where he gets to talk about animals, and that's it, right? That is not honoring his interests, his talents, his passions. At home, we could spend weeks, we could spend months, we could spend years talking all about different animals, their habitats, what they eat, who preys upon them. We could really deep dive into those interests. And I think more and more families see that they can do those same things with their children, that they can really honor their children's learning styles, they can really honor their passions in a way that traditional schools are not going to. And just to echo what Victoria said, I think that really highlights the importance of thinking about ways that educational entrepreneurs can grow and can thrive to really help homeschoolers figure this journey out. I can say I know so many moms who really would like to homeschool their children, and they're afraid of, how do I figure that leap out? How do I figure out balancing a career or some sort of entrepreneurship to continue to manage the bills at home, but also meet the educational needs of my children? And I think the more that they do see examples of folks like ourselves and other homeschool moms who are able to balance both, however that looks, there you will see more and more families choosing untraditional learning methods.
Yeah, and I just go back to that. I really do think it's entrepreneurs like you, and you also mentioned Bernita Bradley, who founded Engage Detroit, who really are supporting these families. I had Bernita on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. Her program started by supporting about a dozen families who chose homeschooling in the early days of the pandemic in 2020. Now she supports more than 100 families, nearly 250 learners throughout Detroit. So you can just see that the more kind of support, the more programs that people like you are creating, the more families will feel supported enough to choose something different. And so that brings me, I guess, Syreeta, to maybe more on the micro level of what does it mean for your growth with Detroit Discoverers? You said you're at capacity now. Your program right now is geared towards the early elementary school ages. Your children are 4 and 5. I believe, Victoria, your child is 6. So the young elementary ages. What does the future look like for your programs in terms of growth to support more of those families? And we'll start with you, Syreeta, sorry.
No problem. So for Detroit Discoverers, we have reserved our name and we are looking into applying to be a standalone nonprofit. I think in this past year, we have made some great relationships and connections with nonprofits like Engage Detroit, like Brilliant Detroit. We've been able to tap into different things with the Nature Center here, with our local YMCA. And so really expanding the opportunity for us to get more funding so that we can serve more families. But I also would love to create a virtual option for families who are maybe working or are not able to meet at the time that our learning group is able to meet, that they could get a kit and kind of have a virtual sign-on group that they could do so their children could continue to have those hands-on learning opportunities, maybe just not physically in the same space and time that we do, but they're still able to access those resources and get ideas for how can we implement certain things at home.
I love that. So expanding, hopefully, capacity for your in-person programs, but also serving families who, for whatever reason, can't attend your programs in person. They still have access to that community and to those resources. Victoria, what about you with Young Scientists in Action? Where do you see that going?
Oh, thank you. Well, definitely, I would say for us, it's a matter of ensuring that we continue with the group that we have and continue to always add students to the body. For me, the science part, it takes time, right? It takes time to develop those skills and to really spend time with it. So looking for additional funding sources to offer more programs, expose children to more science activities, making sure too, when we support families, science can seem expensive. Like you can do science experiment with things at home, but then let's be honest, the scientists in the lab, they have all these cool tools and materials, and so we want to make sure that families have access to those type of materials as well. And so that does require additional funding to be able to give families all the resources that they need to allow their children to explore, do self-exploration or guided exploration in science experiments. So we would say looking into expanding our footprint and partnerships in whatever happening in the city, but also just encouraging families to engage with science through our program as well.
Yeah, and that funding piece is so important. You both separately received micro grants from the Vela Education Fund, the national philanthropic nonprofit that supports non-traditional out-of-system programs. So that was, I imagined, positive for you in your beginning. And now it's just, if we really want to scale, if we really want to support these families in Detroit and enable more parents to exit an assigned district school for other more individualized learner-centered options, then it'd be good to have some more financial support there for that to happen. So best wishes with that. As we begin to wrap up, Victoria, I'd love to hear your advice to parents who, they know that things aren't right with their child's conventional school. Maybe they've been toying with the idea of shifting to homeschooling. What advice would you give to help them make the leap?
Top of mind, I would say, remember that homeschooling is not reinventing school at home. I think that is so key. Um, So allowing time, particularly for students who have been in traditional school already, my child had never entered into any type of traditional school. So I didn't have to do any deschooling process, but I think that that's crucial. Had I had that experience, that would be, that's something I even recommend to others. So just giving yourself time to disassociate from what you've known for however long. It could have just been a year or two. But still there's a disconnect from that system, and then pursue your interests. So your interests as a parent, but also alongside your child pursuing their interests so that they can also grow through seeing in the witness of you learning and pursuing the things that you enjoy. So that's what I would really suggest to families is go. And then lastly, go for it. Just go for it. It's not going to be perfect.
Great advice. Syreeta, what would you add to that? You know, if families are thinking about homeschooling, what would you say to maybe support them in doing that?
I would add to trust your gut. I think so often when parents feel dissatisfaction with the school system, they've kind of been socialized to not trust their gut, right? To accept that the teacher, the principal, all of these other authoritarians are the ones who know best. But that's really not true. Like, we spend the most time with our children. We gave birth to our children. We know our children. And so I think it's really important to just kind of tune into your gut and listen to what it's telling you. I would say that you probably are connected with some homeschool families in your area already, or it might not be that hard to connect with some homeschool families in your area. There are so many groups on Facebook and other social media outlets. Meet a peer and just kind of talk to them about their homeschool journey and see if they can be a mentor or a guide for you. Um, and really just check out some of the other organizations that are in the area, because there probably is someone doing a pilot program that can kind of walk you along the journey and help make you make sense of, is this what would be best for me? And echoing what Victoria said, just do it. It won't be perfect, but traditional school isn't perfect either. And so really know that if you decide to homeschool your child, one thing I told a family, no one is going to be more passionate about your child's education than you. So you might not get it 100% perfect, but you will definitely do your best at it.
I love it. I just have loved this conversation. It's just so inspiring to see what you're building in your programs in Detroit. And as I said earlier, it was just such a pleasure to meet you in person and again, see this growth in homeschooling throughout the Detroit area. How can my listeners and viewers connect with you, learn more about your programs? Victoria, let's start with you.
So I would say that I am present on social media, both Instagram and Facebook, just under my traditional name at this time, Victoria Washington, as I do grow and develop a brand for young scientists in action. So I would just say follow me and pursue my personal social media accounts at this time.
Perfect. And Syreeta, what about you and Detroit Discoverers?
So with Detroit Discoverers, we have not created a online presence social media wise yet, but people can find me on Facebook at Syreeta Danielle, but also can reach out to me via email at sdjemison@gmail.com.
Syreeta Farria and Victoria Washington, thank you again for being on the Liberated podcast, and best wishes and the future growth of both of your programs.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.